Welcome back, guys, to the I Hope They Hear This podcast. And at this point, please say hello to my co-host, Pastor Steven. Thanks for coming back.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, and it's been there's just a lot of stuff happening, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's nice to be able to bounce ideas off you and think through certain things. And one of the things I wanted to talk about today was kind of the landscape of the Korean American church. Sure. We have a mutual friend, Pastor John Yoon. And last week we were joking around how when we talk about is it specifically the coexistence of an English ministry and a KM ministry within a Korean church, like you kind of have to like defend yourself. You know, you made the parallel with
Chris Rock's joke of like, if you like hip hop, you need to be able to defend that.
Right.
And it's the same. If you're an EM in a KM church, you need to be able to defend that.
Right.
Yeah.
It's because there's sadly so many examples of it not working out well.
Yes.
And it's I heard some really crazy stories from my pastor of just kind of people he knows across the country. One of the most egregious ones was where an English ministry within a Korean church, they were saving up money to go buy a building so that they can plant. Mm-hmm. And they saved a significant amount. They fundraised and they had a significant amount. But because none of it was separated, they were still under the umbrella of the KM. The KM said, "Oh, well, we need the money," and then they kind of took it. So they had to kind of start all over.
That's
but
crazy.
the thing that I took away from that was that English ministry pastor, he was so gracious about it. Like he didn't hold, because I actually got to meet him too. But he didn't really hold any like grudges or like ill will toward the Korean church because of that. I just wanted to talk about like, I have a lot of thoughts about the viability of the English ministry within a Korean American church. So, what are your thoughts on it?
Man, yeah, that's so tragic.
Yeah.
God bless him. God bless his heart. There's so many stories, right, of the KM stuff. And it's so tragic if you consider how long Koreans have been in America now, right? Like how many generations have kind of gone through, and we've seen it in so many different regions, obviously more on the West Coast, right? But you see it, we see it on the East Coast and Midwest, and obviously here in the South. And I think that's kind of the tragic thing is like, dude, how is this possible that we are still talking about this, Like, how are these dynamics still playing out regardless of region? And one thing that kind of drives me crazy sometimes, at least being in the South and doing ministry here and seeing KM-EM dynamics play out, a part of me just wants to kind of shout into the landscape and say, are we not aware of how this has already played out elsewhere? It would be wise of us, right, to learn from what has happened in other regions and to try to apply the wisdom of those things to our situation, but we never do that.
No.
It's just the same terrible stories that keep getting played out. And the people that pay the brunt of like the consequences are those who leave the church, right? Like those who are so disenfranchised with the Korean church that, they don't seek Jesus anymore because of this. It's so sad.
That is so sad because it's like the whole thing of like, why as a church are we getting in the way of people meeting Jesus?
100%.
Like, what is it so important? Because so much of what I think about this KM-EM dynamic, there's a lot of like power struggles, a lot of pride involved, and then they kind of wrap it, and both sides, I'm not blaming any one side, both sides kind of wrap it up in this nice bow of, but we must do it this way for the sake of the church kind of thing. And I take a step back and I look at it and I say, look, I fully believe that you believe that, but look at what that decision is doing to the congregation, to the people on both sides. And it's so tragic that people, once they kind of stick to their guns, they have such a hard time admitting that maybe they made a mistake and they step away from it,
Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of my church is going through something similar, but I think it's because of in so we're in Atlanta, Georgia. Sorry, I think my daughter is crying. Sorry, it's
It's
like
your
it's a theme now. Like every time I feel like
yeah.
I've recorded a podcast. But anyways, the reason why, from my perspective, this is happening is because in Atlanta, Georgia, the Korean American population is, uh, on the whole, it's on the second generation, right? The second generation, like you and I,
Yeah.
we've come into adulthood and we're kind of the adults now. Like I think this EM dynamic wasn't a huge issue previously because the EM was a glorified youth group. Like it was mostly the college students or very young adults, and so there was a huge, like there was a clear age distinction. But now what I'm seeing, especially in our area, is a lot of these big like Korean American church pastors, they're coming of age to retire.
Yeah.
And as they're retiring, the mantle is being passed down. But also, like there are EM pastors who've been doing it for a long time who aren't quite at the retirement age. So it's almost like an age shift that's happening. It's like much more fluid. It used to be if you're like 60s, like you're the Korean
Yeah.
ministry pastor. But if you're come in, okay, that's fine. I'm sorry.
No, you good.
Yes. Well, while you're here, why don't you say hi? Say hi.
Say hi.
Can you say hi to the mic? Can you say hi here? Can you say hello? Can you say sorry for interrupting the podcast? No? Okay. Can you go with Onni and Oma? Because we have to do a podcast, okay? I'll come afterwards, okay? Okay. Go upstairs with Oma, okay? Say bye. Can you say bye to the mic? Say bye. Okay. Okay, bye.
Hi.
잠깐만. 아빠부터.
Should have prepared a monologue.
오케이, 알겠어. Bye. Yeah. Sorry.
No.
The next time you do this, maybe you can prepare. Like,
I will. Just a little blurb, little
Okay.
like an ad, and I'll read an ad.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So the Korean American church, the English, yeah, the age kind of the there used to be a clear hierarchy of age, but
Yeah.
now that's much more fluid.
Sure.
And I think it's revealing a lot of, like, we're not just a glorified youth group. Like, we're adults and we have our convictions, we have our visions, and like it's almost like we've outgrown the little kiddie pool of the bigger Korean church. And as we're coming to that realization, I think that's where kind of the conflict is happening. Or what's your take on that?
I agree with that, but I think in line with that, one of the issues is like, if you think about parenting, right? Like, as your child grows, you adapt your parenting based on where they are in maturity, right? Like the way you treat your oldest is different than the way you treat your youngest. And as they continue to grow, you're going to adjust because that's what good parents do. And so there's going to be a point that, yes, you stop treating them like a child, but there's a progression that gets you there, right? I think that a lot of times in the KM-EM dynamic, first of all, it's hard to get a KM to recognize the EM as adults,
Yeah.
but there's no progression there. And so a lot of times, even when an EM leaves, like there hasn't been this progression of them growing into this role to be able to take the mantle of leaders in the church or elders or deacons in the church. And so I think there's a great disservice being done there as well, where there's no preparedness in terms of that. But I do agree, now that there is more people entering into the 30s and 40s on a second gen level, we're kind of seeing that rift a little bit more. And not that it didn't exist before,
Sure.
but there's more of us now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in terms of that preparedness, Like, what are some of the things that you think the Korean church could be doing better to get the EM more prepared?
I think in one sense it depends on the goal of the Korean church, right? Are you trying to keep this KM thing together, or do you want them to plant out one day? And I think KMs need to make decisions on that front, right? And be very clear. Like write it into your bylaws, right? Like make it really clear. Because it's kind of crazy. It's almost like if you did a children's ministry, like you would have to be very clear on what the purpose of that children's ministry is, right? Like you don't want 17-year-olds in your children's ministry, right? That would be a lack of preparedness on your front. And so I think KMs need to have a really clear understanding of what that is. In order to figure out what preparedness looks like. But let's say you want them to become independent one day. Then you need to figure out, hey, like when they turn 18, what seats at the table do we offer them? Right? Like, how do we teach them to be elders and deacons? How do we teach them to do X, Y, and Z? And that means relinquishing, right, some of their roles and responsibilities within the church for the sake of the next generation. And that's what parents are supposed to do, right? Like to a certain extent, you need to relinquish more and more in order for your child to grow. Otherwise, I don't know, just gonna keep wiping their butt until they're 18, you
Right.
know?
Right. Yeah, no, and that's the sad thing is, well, at my church in particular, for the EM, the concept of church membership, the concept of congregational votes, even though we're like a congregational Baptist church, oh, there's a term for it.
Congregationalism.
Yeah, yeah, elder-led congregational church. Yeah, so like even though we are that, the EM, for the most part, I'm 37 now. Until I was like 30, 33, 34, like our English ministry was literally just that, just the English ministry.
Yeah.
We didn't have nobody came over and said, "Oh, you guys are adults now. Why don't you come take our membership courses and become a member of our church? And you can. These are the ways that you can serve and all that kind of stuff." Like none of that was presented to us. You know, it was purely just, oh, the youth group pastor is a English speaker, so he's part of your service, so he recruits you to teach youth group. Or the children's ministry pastor is also that, so they'll recruit you to do children's ministry work.
Yes.
But there is no real sense of church ownership. It's still very much like the English stuff we'll let you guys take care of because we're not good at English. But anything beyond that, we'll handle it. Like, don't bother us about that.
100%.
And which is, like, yeah, no wonder English speaking Korean Americans can't really, leave the nest per se, right? And it's like there are people like in their 40s and 50s that are still kind of stuck in that, where like it really is, I think, stunting their faith journey by keeping them in that weird pseudo glorified youth group setting. So what is it about do you have a sense of what it is about the Korean American church that is so bad at that?
There's probably a lot of cultural notes there, but I think one of the things is we're very short-sighted. We are incredibly short-sighted, and I understand why. It's like, if you're an immigrant coming to the States, and you suffered a lot for it, and in the church, like, you want some level of prestige or some level of acclaim or some level of control, some level of consistency. It's kind of like I sacrifice in every other area of my life, but I think there's a short-sightedness to it where I think that right now KMs still think that they're going to last and they're going to make it. And so because of that, you're putting all your ducks in this basket of, the first gen needs to be the primary source of investment. And you can make that same condemnation, I think, to our American church counterpoints, where it's like, if you're focusing mostly on your adult congregation and you don't care about the next gen or the lost, there's probably a problem there. Later down the line, you're going to run into some issues. But I think for the Korean church, there's this short-sightedness of, let's just really focus in on the first gen and what the first gen needs. I don't think that they have thought through the fact that immigration will come to a halt, and our people are actually going extinct. So eventually, like you will not have a church,
Yeah.
and you'll look to this generation, and you'll find us scattered. And what are you going to do about that?
Right.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the people who get frustrated with the Korean American church, they end up going to like a Caucasian church or
Absolutely.
elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was surprised to learn that there are mega churches that have like Korean specific ministries.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
even if you're more comfortable with Korean, there are options out there that are not in the Korean American
100%.
church. Yeah, which is really sad.
So sad.
That we're almost driving people away,
Yes.
in a sense.
Yeah.
But you bring up a really interesting point about how the Koreans are basically going extinct.
Yeah.
I think they said it's like already too late. There's like nothing.
It's so tragic.
Yeah, there's like nothing we can do.
Yeah.
At this point, it's there's going to be a catastrophic decline that will probably amount to some sort of collapse of at least the economic structure of
Yeah.
South Korea. And I guess some of the policies they can change there are maybe like immigration and things like that. But
Sure.
ethnically, Koreans are going extinct, which like it does make you think like what is it that the Korean American church is like banking on? Like why haven't it, because like it's the writings on the wall. Like
Yes.
why can't they see we should be getting the next generation ready to kind of take over and help prepare them as much as possible? Is it because no one did that for them, so they don't know how, or anything else you think that's there?
I mean, like the idea of serving the children in that type of capacity, I don't think that's a strong cultural note, right? Like everything's kind of flowing upwards, right, in our culture rather than flowing down. I think that probably has something to do with it. But yeah, there's not a model for it, right? I feel like in a lot of Korean churches too, it's like the unspoken philosophy is like children are to be seen, not heard, right? Like they're not really your focal point of investment on that front.
Yeah.
And that's because things like family discipleship or spiritual formation, like realistically, they don't happen in the home anyways to begin with. And so that relational dynamic isn't there either. And yeah, I think that there is this tendency for kids to be more like commodities and accessories rather than like the lifeblood of the church. And so, yeah, all the investment goes into, the church choir or like it's like, here's a perfect example. Like if in a Korean immigrant church, if you don't have a children's pastor, you will figure it out. If you don't have a choir director, you will not make it. And I think that's insane. Like, I don't know how many churches I've been to where I have seen the choir director get paid more than the children's pastor, which is ludicrous. It's ludicrous. Like, all due respect to the choir people.
Sure.
My mom's on Sangade. Like, I get it.
Yeah.
But, like, who cares? Like, who cares? Like, who's leading the children?
Right.
Who, you know what I mean? Like, you're not doing it because of the language barrier, culture barrier. Fine. Then hire someone. Like, make sure that is the focal point and investment. Rather than just, getting someone who could teach the kids how to dance for your Christmas service,
Right. Right.
It's crazy, but it shows where the investment is. And it's that old thing too, right? Where it's like the children's equipment is the old youth group equipment, which is the old CAMS equipment. And it's that trickle down that really shows where our priorities at. And so, you could pray for the kids all you want. You can say that they matter. You can say that you love them. You can say that you want them to come to know the Lord. But like at the end of the day, like at a certain point, you do have to put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah. Yeah. And so much of the younger ministries, like children's youth, I feel like are just selling points to the KM.
Oh, jeez, yeah.
And because of the people, I mean, like, I don't know how accurate this is. It's just my sense of the general landscape. I think a lot of Korean American churches, what they do is they try to emulate Caucasian white churches. And a lot of the big name white churches are very seeker friendly, right? So
Sure.
I think the Korean American church, they do this thing where it's like, let's just how do we fill the pews of our church? And we need to have a good kids program. We need to have a good adult like no good youth group program in case the people have kids, and like all these like special programs that make it appealing for the adults to come. And if that's kind of how you're attracting people, like I don't know how deep the faith of the adults that you're attracting are, and therefore I don't know how much they care about the quality of the children's ministries. And so you can just have a babysitter there, like somebody just there, like who is not even theologically trained, or I mean, yeah, just somebody who's there to just a body that's just there, you know?
Yeah.
So that's so tragic that I feel like that's kind of how things are going. Because I have a friend who's a youth group pastor, and he told me, like, literally, after every staff meeting, like, there's like a list of priorities that's kind of like on their agenda. It's like, and all the like good stuff, like, oh God, you know, all that kind of stuff. And then it's the Korean adult ministry, like the worship. And then below that, so this is a list of priorities, right? And below that is your respective ministries. So like in the staff
That's
meeting,
wild.
yeah, he's
It's wild.
saying the quiet part out loud, you know?
Yep.
Like he's basically saying, I want you to do well so that we can support the.
Yes.
And no wonder it's like something crazy like 80 or 90% of
Yeah.
youth group students leave after youth group, and 50% of that come back maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, right?
Maybe.
So yeah, it's so mind-boggling to me that they can be so short-sighted. Yeah.
It's insane. It's insane. And, you know, the Korean church is as guilty, if not more guilty, of the transfer of the saints than any other church in America, where they're so good at trading members because it is, like you said, it's so attraction focused, right? Like right now in our area, there's a Korean church it's on the come up, right? They
Oh yeah.
bought a huge building, like that's the new thing, right? And I was talking to my mom about this, and she made a really interesting comment about like Korean church culture. She's like, there was a time where Korean immigrants, when it came to church, they're willing to go to a small church and just suffer and like work really hard and like get it, really put everything into it. But she says she sees a shift in that landscape where people just want a comfortable place to attend. And churches are picking up on this, right? They're making it easier and easier to attend. And so, yeah, it's just everything's an accessory, everything is a commodity. And so, what do EMs, what do youth or the children's, like, what do they have to look up to? It's just nothing. Yeah. And it is glorified babysitting. You know, it's like I started youth ministry, when I was like 23, 24. I literally was just one life stage away from my youth students. Like, that's insane. Like, you know what I mean? Like, if thinking about it now, like if my son was 17 and his youth pastor was 24, I'd be like, nah, I'm good. Like,
Right.
yeah, I'll teach you,
Right.
right? It's okay. He can be your mentor. He could be an older brother figure, like take you out to Taco Mac and stuff. But like, that's crazy to me. I wasn't finished with seminary or nothing, but shows what you care about.
No, but I remember that because all the like pastor friends that we have. I feel like you guys started like around the same age, meaning like in early 20s.
Yeah.
And that was almost like a commodity, like finding someone that
Yes.
young, and they wrapped it around in, they can relate to the students so well.
Yeah.
But like relatability is not the goal.
Absolutely. My frontal lobe was not developed. Like, you should not put me in that position.
Right. And it's so sad that that was kind of like a selling point. Like
Yes.
back when I was in youth group, and maybe a little bit even like when I had graduated out of youth group, it was always like, oh, you should go to that church. That church has a really cool young pastor.
Yes.
Yeah. And like now thinking back on it, the conversation should have been, oh, you should go to that church. That pastor knows what he's doing.
Yes.
Like has good character.
100%.
And they care about the youth group,
Yes.
not just like you go on fun like retreats, and
Yeah.
it's literally just like it's babysitting and like all these programs to keep you entertained.
Yes.
And no wonder the moment you graduate out of that and it's kind of the adult ministry of EM, and it's no longer flashy and fun like that. No wonder so
Yes.
many of them leave, because
100%.
what we've drawn them to is what they've, what's the term? What you draw them with is,
What you keep them with.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And the moment it goes away, it's, yeah, it's so tragic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was counting the number of members in our EM right now that came up through the youth group, and like we're a fairly large church, you know, and so, and this is like everybody. So the oldest I think that came up through our youth group is my wife, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it goes all the way down to like 24, 21 year olds, and there's like maybe a handful, and I'm just like, man, like I've seen all those guys like through youth group, because I used to be a youth group teacher as well. I've taught a lot of them, so I've seen them kind of like grow, and
Yes.
it felt like they were like really like serious about their faith. But I'm just like what happened to them? Like why did this happen? And the thing that I always come back to was, yeah, we taught them how to have a good time with the guise of Christianity,
Yes.
but we didn't really teach them how to be serious about their
100%.
faith. Yeah.
100%. Because when you go to college, there are more good times, right? There are other churches that will offer you a good time. That why would you come back? That's insane, right? But yeah, it's like in a lot of ways we're just setting up people for failure. And yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. So now that we've talked about kind of the flaws of how, I guess, the faults of the KM in bringing up the EM. So this is, I feel like, mostly a conversation of the past, like what's happened in the past. But now with people who are like us, the second generation, but fully into our adulthood, with kids, you know, like the third generation exists now, right, in Atlanta. Like, what can we do? Like, do you think there's a solution to this kind of EM/KM dilemma, or is it hopeless? Yeah.
I think that apart from rare exceptions, every EM should really focus on becoming its own healthy, independent church, and to do it with the least amount of baggage possible. Do not spend most of your energies on fighting, because you need those energies to plant or transplant, right? Like, do not become so wrapped up in the fight against the KM that you forget about why you should be a church, right? Like what it means to be a kingdom advancing people. I would encourage EMs to really set the vision of not just being different than the KM, but what is that gospel call, right? And focus your main energies in that. Rather than just hating the KM. There'll be a time for that, really focus in on that. But I think that every EM ultimately should have that goal, unless you have a pastor who's going to do both. One pastor that is KM in the EM, I think that you can make that model work. There's going to be limitations, but you can make that model work. But if there's any other church that there's a KM and there's an EM there, the EM should make every intention to become its own independent church one day. And hopefully with the blessing of the KM,
Right.
But yeah.
You know what's like really sad about that is, you would think that, if you're thinking about like passing down, like inheritance and like passing down of things, right? Like the natural progression should be, oh, like we've built this for you, and whatever we've built, we will pass down to you. So like I'm saying this from the perspective of, I'm a father. I don't want my kids to have to start where I started. Like same with my parents, right? My parents, like, they worked their butts off and they gave me a huge leg up, like, so that I could be as comfortable as I am now. And the idea is that, oh, yeah, I want to allow that for my kids as well. Like I want to pass down as much of what I've learned and as much of what like comfort that I can provide them so that they can pursue their passions and like the American dream, right?
Sure.
It's funny how that doesn't really translate to the Korean American church because I haven't seen. Yeah, I'm kind of going through my head right now. I haven't seen a single example of a Korean church passing their building down to the English ministry. I've only seen cases where a KM gets so small and they just kind of dwindle out and they just kind of disappear. It's
Sure.
the passing of the torch in a more concrete sense, right? I don't think I've ever really seen a good example of that in Atlanta at least.
Yeah.
Do you think that's we're kind of just doomed to that unless we have, like you said, a pastor who does both the EM and the KM?
Yeah, I mean, I think another way around that is if you have an EM that's willing to stay, that eventually becomes the main congregation and then is willing to take care of the KM with its senior members, with the elderly. I think if you had a unique situation like that, that's possible, where the KM is willing to hand it off to the EM, but the KM still then exists under the EM, that you're kind of switching the roles. I think that's possible because, Jesus.
Right.
But like practically, like that's tough. You need the right KM senior pastor, and you would also need the right EM pastor too. And that's a big ask.
Yeah.
That's a big ask. And sometimes we shoot ourselves in the foot with that because KMs still want to grow. They want to attract younger members, and every time that happens, it really creates this odd stall with the KM EM dynamic. One of the things that drives me insane is like when a KM talks about like handing things off to an EM one day, but then they start a young KM group, right? Like a KM 청년부, and I'm like, what are you doing?
Right.
Like that makes zero sense. And if you can't see that that is antithetical to your vision statement, then you are lost, right? Like what are you doing? It's crazy. And so yeah. Ugh, it's tragic.
I'm so sorry.
Oh.
What is happening? What's wrong? 응? 아빠랑 있을래? 아빠 근데 팟캐스트 하고 있어. 아빠 다 끝나고 사연한테 갈게, 오케이? 오케이? 오케이. 올라가.
It's tragic. It's tragic. Her tears are for the Korean church.
I know. No, yeah, seriously. And the interesting thing that kind of made me realize something as you were saying that is, one is, I wonder if the Korean church are aware that once they become elderly, they're gonna need somebody to take care of them. But who's gonna be there to do that? Because there's like our church right now, there's like a silver teak or whatever, like where it takes kind of the elderly, and that's like so important, like it gets the elderly out, it gives them community and all of that. But if your church kind of dwindles to nothing because there's not a really good succession plan, then I mean, like you said, our races are going extinct.
Yeah.
Who's gonna eventually take care of them?
Exactly.
Yeah. I hope they hear this and they start thinking about that. And the other thing that I thought of was because KMs want to grow, they're attracting like younger people, and there's like 청년부, like KM 청년부 and all that. I think it even goes further that, like, how I was talking about the pastors like retiring. I think they're bringing in younger Korean pastors as well. So it kind of like if you thought that having a KM 청년부 was a stall to that vision, like this is a full-on stop to that vision.
Sure.
Because like the previous pastor might have had the vision of because the retired pastor at my church, his vision was, they always said, because there's like a smaller EM sanctuary and they had the bigger KM. They were like, eventually one day we're gonna be swapped. Like the English ministry is gonna worship in this bigger one, and the KM is gonna be in a smaller location. But I mean, he's gone, and so is the vision with him. So like, it's there is this weird like, is it I guess I understand it because it is self-preservation. Like the younger Korean people, they want to maintain the Korean church that they like, like grew up in. Or I guess younger Korean speaking
Yeah.
people. So I get it, but I don't think mathematically speaking that's wise. You're eventually gonna run out of congregants.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think for the young camp pastors who are on the scene, or even like the 1.5 guys, it is shocking sometimes of just like, oh wow, you speak English, brother, but like we're just not on the same page, you
Yeah.
know. But I think even that, with those brothers who are doing ministry, it's like there needs to be a better come to the table. And it's so sad that even with a generation change on that front, there is no change. They're just the same. So sometimes I see someone who's kind of 1.5, they speak English, and my hopes are just like ignited and then like just shut down. I'm just like, well, that's not true.
Right.
Like it is, the culture is so strong. That desire for just like more is so strong that it just overtakes everything.
Yeah. And I wonder if there's a little bit of that as these younger guys become, the the playmakers or the people in
Yeah.
charge, right? I wonder if the plays that they're pulling from their playbook is just what they lived through. And so their idea still is, well, EM needs to be with under the KM, and like they have to submit to us, and we need that EM there so that the parents, like the older parents who have kids going into college and all that, they have somewhere that they can put their kids and then say, oh, like we go to the same church, and I'd be all hunky dory, happy about the situation, like because that's the only model they've seen.
Yeah.
I wonder if that again is kind of the reinforcer to not growing into this new dynamic of the demographic shift,
Yeah.
but clinging to this older model of I'm just gonna do what I know.
Yeah. That's so obtuse though, right? Because it's like, just even if we just look at our region, like how many successful KM EM dynamics do we have? And how many from there how many even successful EM plants have we had, considering how many EMs probably existed in this region, for the past 10, 20 years or whatnot, It's everything's so dismally low. And just look at the landscape, and it almost would force you to think about things differently. But I think what's also really tragic about the KMEM talk in terms of just handing down and all that is like, that shouldn't be our main goal, right? Like our goal is to be heralds of the gospel, right? Like we want to see the gospel change people's lives, for the lost to be found, for a new generation to just rise up, for the church of Christ, right, to be built on earth as it is in heaven. And yet the KMEM thing is this predominant looming thing, right?
Yeah.
That it has replaced the urgency of the gospel for the urgency of figuring out generational dynamics. And that to me is insane.
Right.
Like, talk about losing like focus of the prize. Like it's such a shame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was texting somebody, it's a friend out in Texas, and he was just like talking to me about like kind of a church planting opportunity he has, and like talking to me about it, like in like, oh, like would your church be interested in like partnering up with us on that? And I was like, it's not really a good time for our church right now because of all the stuff that's happening in our church. And he was like super gracious about it. Oh yeah, like, and so we were just kind of talking, and kind of like we talked about other stuff, but like stepping away from it, like I was like, man, what a shame that because of those KM EM dynamics, that it's literally stopping us from doing like church work. Like we're like, we don't have enough bandwidth to do the things that we should be doing because of the situation we found ourselves in. It's so tragic.
It's insane.
Yeah, it really is. Like, yeah, like what are we doing?
Yes.
Yeah.
And when you're in a stressful KM/EM dynamic, that does take up a majority of your thought, of your energy, your emotional capacity. I mean, to be frank, most of your prayer life starts to get dedicated just to that, if they haven't wrung it out of you to begin with. And so, it's really sad.
Yeah.
And then if you have younger leaders who become more privy to that information but don't have the maturity to be able to handle it, it breaks them. You know, I say this too much, but again, like, you see how cookies get made, you don't want any cookies anymore. I feel that a lot for young EM leaders, where if you kind of open the veil a little bit and they see too much and they can't handle that, it breaks them. It breaks them because a lot of these young EM leaders, they love their church, right? It's the church they grew up at. It's the church they've known their whole life. And all of a sudden they look behind that veil, they look behind the curtain and say, oh, this is really ugly. And you don't know how to handle that, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. You know, as a joke, like at the height of the stress of all the church stuff happening, my wife, she was like, should we just leave and go to Han Vision? Like, your church. Like, it was a kind of a joke.
Yeah.
But there is truth to kind of how we deal with stress sometimes.
Yeah.
Of
It's good.
like, yeah, I don't want to like we obviously don't have the same level of grit that our parents had to kind of stay,
100%.
suffer, like fight for the sanctity of the church, you know.
Yes.
And so, I mean, obviously, like she said it and we kind of laughed about it and whatever. Like, yeah. Unfortunately, I will not be going to High Vision.
We're missing out.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. But they're like, I don't know. It was sad to think like we joke about it, but I don't know if we're the rule or the exception in situations like this, you know. And it's sad to think of all the people out there. Actually know a couple of people who I'm close to now who have a lot of church hurt and church trauma because of kind of looking back behind the veil and seeing all the flaws.
Absolutely.
You know? Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, for anyone that I've been at church with where they're a member and they're shifting into a leadership position, whether that's something pastoral or just, just higher up the ranks, so to speak, I always tell them, like, when they're thinking about doing it, I always tell them it's so hard to work for the church that you love. Please be careful. Like, think through this. And you have to say no to things, because the more you say yes, you get closer and closer and closer to seeing more and more of the church. And realistically, your heart's not going to be able to handle it. It's going to break you. And yeah, those are real church hurts, you know?
Yeah.
Yep.
So sad. So sad. So, is there light at the end of the tunnel? Do you think churches, the Korean American churches, are gonna shift to this single pastor for the KMEM model, or is your prognosis that eventually Korean American churches are gonna die out?
We'll probably mostly die out. I mean, we're dying out right now, right? The numbers are getting smaller and smaller. Every year, there's more and more Korean churches that are disappearing, right? Especially in the cities where immigration is really slowed down. Like, for example, like Chicago. New immigrants are going to Chicago, right? They're coming to Atlanta or they're going to Alabama, right? And so, in those places, I think we're already seeing that. I think for us here in Atlanta, we probably got another 10, 15 years of just like, people are coming in. And then from there, I think we'll start to see a big shift. And so I think there's a lot of responsibility on EMs right now on what are we going to do about this, right? And, my encouragement to EMs right now would be, let's get healthy. Let's become healthy ministries, healthy churches. I understand the CAM stuff is super stressful, but let's get as healthy as we possibly can. And I think in light of that, certain EMs will probably remain predominantly Korean American, right? Moving into that third. Others will probably become more Pan-Asian, right? And others will probably become more multi-ethnic. So yeah.
Yeah. it's it's hopeful and sad at the same time
Yeah.
because it almost feels like we're all on this boat together, and because the current captains refuse to relinquish control of the boat, all these people are taking lifeboats and leaving, and this guy's still continuing to steer the boat and is headed right to an island or something, like
Yeah.
on a crash course.
For sure.
So it's I think hopeful for people like us because I think thankfully I think we're as a generation and the people group in Atlanta, I think we have the resources and the numbers to do it well.
Yeah.
But it's sad for the place we're coming from because like I owe my faith right to my church that I grew up in. It's the Korean church,
Yes.
you know, and to think that because of I mean it's like so full disclosure like with I mean you know kind of everything that's happened with my church like I was like really angry for a while, and once the anger subsided, I realized that like what was there and what was remaining was just sadness. It's like I was like I told my wife like you know like I think I'm sad. Like it's not like I'm no longer like just because of who my personality like typical Korean American guy. I'm like very much get fired up when like there's like injustice or like whatever, and I think we've been wronged. You know, I get really fired up and I'm like oh like we gotta do this and that. But with things kind of more on the settling down side of the situation, like as the dust is settling a little bit, I'm like, oh, it's gonna be sad to imagine a church where like I don't get to run into these people that like I've looked up to like
Yeah.
for the majority of my life, like every week,
Yeah.
and like, who's gonna take care of them when they get older? Like so,
Yes.
it I think it's like I almost like I mean I'm fully aware that there was a lot of repenting I need to do. Like I don't think I handled the situation as
Mm.
godly as I should have, but I regretted like not recognizing that sadness earlier, because like I think there was so much energy spent on being angry and upset rather than like like appreciating and because mourning something means that there was something that you loved, right? And that kind of like thinking back to the thing that I loved, yeah, I'm still processing it. I'm still in the middle of kind of how do I really feel about it. Yeah.
I remember listening to someone talk about the region that Jesus grew up in, being a very culturally conservative region. And so it was an area where the culture of the Pharisees was very predominant. And so, Jesus would have grown up around this, right? The Pharisaical culture. Obviously, Jesus would have had a rabbi himself. He grew up in this culture. That was his upbringing. And I remember hearing that, and it allowed me to think through a lot of what Jesus says to the Pharisees in a different tone. He's very sharp with them, right? He's very stern with them. He's very frequently rebuking them. But if he grew up around them, maybe there's also a lot of just heartbreak too, right? Like he's sad. Like, of course you should know better. Why, after all these years, you still not know any better, right? Like repent, repent. And I think there it has to be a measure of grief when we think about the Korean immigrant church, because it's like, and a part of it is that it probably didn't have to be like this, but it is, and we're losing something important, Yeah.
Yeah, and there is a part of me that still believes that there are better ways to do this, but more and more, because there was a time when, like maybe if it's like 10 years ago, like in my mid 20s, like or late 20s, kind of going into 30s, where like I would think, no, like we can do this. Like we can be a EM and a KM that coexists and that collaborates and works together. Like it doesn't have to be this contentious like situation. And I held on to that belief for a really long time. But I remember distinctly there was a because John Yoon, Pastor
Yeah.
John Yoon, we were talking about. He was kind of like sharing his vision, and his like desires for this church and all that kind of stuff, and it, like some sort of like I forget. It was like a networking, like church networking thing. It was like a barbecue at someone's house, and I don't remember who this other guy was because I only saw him that one time. But John was talking to him about it, and I was just kind of off to the side doing my own thing. But I remember John explaining, "Oh yeah, like I really want this for the KM and the EM church." And I remember the other guy saying, "Yeah, but John, it's not gonna be possible. Like it's never gonna happen." And I remember thinking, "Bro, that's kind of harsh. Like why are you being such a Debbie Downer
Yeah,
right
yeah,
now?"
on this
Like,
man's dream.
yeah, yeah. But and I don't know that I still fully believe him, but I understand that guy more and more.
Yeah.
Like as I get older.
Yes.
And it's so funny like talking to John about it cuz even John Yoon, even he's like I wish there were better stories I could tell to defend like my vision.
Yeah.
That he told us that last
Yes.
week, so he's fully aware too, but it's just sad that like this like what I used to think was this like old person cynical pessimism
Yeah.
is kind of what I'm growing into.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. We're having our own grumpy old man moment
Right.
when it
Right.
comes to thinking through the Korean church. But I think it's because the stories are so real, and the pain is so real. And it just seems like the logical trajectory. And there's, some churches that I've run into that seem to have a different approach. But it's like, I think what saddens me when I see a church that does seem to have it right is that it's actually not a model you could replicate because it's that senior pastor, it's that EM pastor, it's that congregation, it's that elder board.
Right.
And you can't replicate that heart.
Right.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that because, like, with our church, all the stuff that's happening, it's like we're like 3 years into being an independent church, and so the question is, why didn't this happen before?
Yeah.
And it's because you're right. Like, we had a different KM pastor, we had different people on the elder board. Like, the dynamics were so different. So like understanding and a lot of relational collateral that was there.
Yes.
A relational capital, but with brand new people, it's none of that's there. The trust is very thin, and a slight misunderstanding can blow into yeah. So yeah, it is sad, and that also makes me sad to think, man, it's not that the entire congregation on the English ministry side and the entire congregation on the KM ministry side are like have problems with each other, and that's why this is happening. I feel like a lot of the times it's purely just at the top, like
Yes.
leadership. Like
Absolutely.
something goes wrong with the leadership, and that's why this happens.
Yes.
Sometimes to the protest of the people on both sides of the
100%.
congregation, and that adds another layer of like sadness to me. Yeah, my hope for the English speaking Korean American churches, even that I don't know how long will last. I think eventually with a long enough timeline we'll all just become multi ethnic churches. But while we have our place in history, my hope is that when the KM needs us, that we'd be gracious enough to extend a helping hand.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if this will happen, right? Like you said, it's even rare to see a successful EM church plant, but assuming that we get better at it and there's a lot of EM churches, like Korean churches out there, when the KM needs help, like I hope that we can all say, yeah, we'll help you. Like,
Yeah.
come on, and we'll try to figure this out together. I really hope and pray that that's where we'll get to. Am I being foolish? Am I being too hopeful?
It's beautiful enough to where, I think it's good to put your hope in that, in the sense of like, there is still this responsibility to honor the previous generation. I think about that a lot with the handing off of Moses and Joshua of, it became very evident that this generation of Moses wasn't going to go into the promised land. But it's not like they died the next day. You know what I mean? Like they stuck around for a while. Like Moses wrote Deuteronomy during this time. Like there's so much happening, and that younger generation is just they're waiting, and they're taking care of the elderly. You know, they're having worship and they're eating together. They're burying the dead. They're allowing them to die with dignity, right? I think in a lot of ways, if you are in EM context right now, when you look at the KM counterpoint, you really do have to view it as hospice ministry. That if it does have an expiration date, and I think it's very clear that it does, then it's a question of how do you allow that to happen with dignity? How do you lay that to rest with honor, even though there are so many flaws there, right? And somewhere in the midst of that, that's also our relationship right now with our parents, right? It's like, yes, you are very aware of their flaws, but what does it mean to offer them dignity in the last chapters of their life? And I think that's one of the ways we can kind of be hopeful and offer something of, yeah, this is really messy, but this is still, there's still a command to show dignity for Christ likeness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That is the hope. But it's so, like, I'm just trying to think of what it's going to look like if that situation ever happens where we are kind of called to help the KM.
Yeah.
Like, there's going to be so much baggage that I can see a lot of, like, EM churches themselves dividing and fighting one another
100%.
about that issue.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's so sad that it has to be that way. Because, yeah, it doesn't, like, there was a joke. I don't even know. I don't think this was a joke because I see it. But somebody at one point told me, and this was when I was like in high school, and somebody said, American churches, they multiply by planting. Korean churches, they multiply by fighting and then
Yeah,
splitting.
dividing. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's sad that that's kind of our legacy, and it's also sad that at least in our region, it's looking like the legacy of the Korean American church won't necessarily be this beautiful send off. It'll mostly be a source of a lot of trauma, source of a lot of church wounds and hurts and reasons why people stop going to the Korean American church and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So many splits.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so funny. Like, I remember the way that people would talk about Korean churches. It's like, when did you come to Atlanta?
2007.
Yeah, like right around that time, there were so many Korean churches, right? And it was always, oh, you go to that church? Oh, I've never heard of that. And then they'll say, it's the one that split off from XYZ church.
100%. 100%. Yep.
And it's so sad to think that, I mean, because there was so much good on the opposite end, right? That the KM did, like so much prayer, so many prayer warriors, so many people that like struggled through like surviving, and so like, do you kind of see me going like singing back and forth?
Yep.
Yeah, it's cause I'm sorry, I'm processing real time.
Yeah.
I do this on the daily, so I go through the Machine Bible reading plan, and it's basically 4 books every day, a chapter of 4 books every day, and the past like week it has been like Psalms. Like, one of the books would be Psalms and another book would be like the epistles, and it was I went through like First Peter. I'm into like wrapping up Second Peter now, but like every day I would read the Psalms. Like, yeah, David went through hard times. Like, look at David crying out to like God about like all the hardships he's going through, and like he's asking God to like smite his enemies and all that. Like, I totally relate to David.
Yeah.
And I read First Peter, and he's always talking about, like, I think this was First Peter 2, or maybe Second. It's in one of the Peters where Peter says like, "What good is it if you endure because you sinned? Like, but if you endure when you haven't done anything wrong, like that's what God calls you to do. That's what Jesus calls you to do, because that's what Jesus did."
Yeah.
And I'm like, I get so challenged because
Yes.
in my limited purview, and I'll fully admit this, like, I believe what we're doing on our EM side is all righteous and good, and I feel like we haven't done anything wrong, and a lot of the stuff that's happening is purely because of what they've done to us, which I'm sure is not accurate.
Sure.
I'm sure there's things I don't know, and I only know one side of the story. I'm super biased, but like I read that and I'm like, man, like that's what Jesus is calling us to do. Like, and in other parts of the letters that Peter wrote, he talks about like defending the unity of the church and
Yes.
like all these kind of things. And like I get so challenged. Like I'm so fired up reading the Psalms, but I'm so like, oh, like it's so hard to, like I can finally understand what people said when like Jesus was in his ministry. People said, "Oh, that's a hard teaching to accept. Who can follow you?"
Yes.
Like, I kind of felt, I mean, a little glimpse of that.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
how can I possibly, after all that's happened, like just endure? How can I possibly like love these guys? How can I possibly like still like cling to the unity of the church after all of this? But I think that's the beautiful thing about Christianity, that it's that Jesus accepts us where we are, but he loves us too much to just leave us there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm growing, guys. If throughout this episode you felt like I wasn't being gracious enough, it's because I'm in
In
the
the thick
process
of
of
it,
it.
in the thick
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
But I think when in holding those two things in tension, like that's how we figure out what wisdom is, right? And being willing to remain in the tension is wisdom. We'll always look back on these previous areas of our life and see where we were wrong, right? See how we erred, how we weren't gracious enough, how we weren't understanding enough. And what I've come to find that doesn't mean you were wrong, right? Like, there are things that the previous generation does and has done that are just fundamentally wrong. But the way that we approach it can always be more gracious, can always be more understanding. And a part of growing in wisdom, I think, is getting into that journey of, okay, how is it possible that you are both utterly wrong and yet I'm called to be utterly forgiving, right? And I think that's how we grow in our wisdom.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. Amen.
It's tough though.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to end on a happier note, our favorite person to talk about, Wesley Huff.
Yeah.
Did you see him on the Flagrant podcast?
No, I didn't.
Yeah,
I've been the highlights have been coming through, but I
Yeah.
haven't watched the whole thing.
So I actually watched the whole thing. I was split between, oh, this is like really good, and also like, man, this is the way that non-Christians think, huh? Like, I guess I've been so far removed
Yeah.
from like an atheist's perspective. It was just interesting. It was interesting to hear them ask all these questions that seemed so like obvious to me that it made me think, oh, the way that I should evangelize is I need to kind of go back and kind of get in this mindset, because I probably glossed over so much of this stuff because I think it's common knowledge.
Yeah.
When evidently it's not. Yeah. And so it's fascinating watch. You should.
I will definitely watch it. And without any context of what's happening there, what you're saying reminds me of something that I've been kind of thinking lately about atheism in 2025. Respectfully and lovingly, it's not as sharp as it once was. When I look at those who are strong in the atheist camp, they're holding on to these old arguments, it seems, that have long been rejected or
Right.
just like, come on, what are we talking about right
Yeah,
now?
yeah.
Like, there needs to, not that I want this, but there needs to be a new wave or something,
Right.
because like what you're bringing to the table these days, like it's over,
Yeah.
right? Like Christian apologists have advanced way beyond this at this point.
Right.
And yeah, and so with, I think the atheist movement, they need a refresh or a rebrand or something, or
Yeah.
obviously just believe in Jesus.
Right,
But
right.
yeah, like I find that it's like, oh, really?
Yeah.
Like that's the talking point?
Right.
Yeah.
You know, there's an interview that Paul Rudd did while he was promoting Ghostbusters.
Uh-huh.
And somebody said, and he has these young co-stars. One of them is Finn. He's one of the kids from Stranger Things.
Oh, yeah.
But the interviewer asks, if you could talk to anybody dead or alive, like who would it be? And Paul Rudd goes, oh, Jesus Christ. And the kids that are there with him, they kind of laugh. And you can kind of faintly hear the Stranger Things kid going, well, it has to be someone like who existed. And then Paul Rudd, like, I don't know if he heard that or not, but then he kind of like glosses over it, like, well, like he was a real guy, he existed. Like
Yeah.
the question is whether he was God or not.
Sure.
You know. So and then he's like, it'd be fascinating to hear from him what the
Yeah,
deal
yeah,
was.
yeah.
So like to me, yeah, like
That's crazy.
if it's so funny that there are some people out there that still question the existence of Jesus as a person when there's not really any scholar that believes that at this
No
point.
one's arguing that.
Yeah,
At
there's
this. Yep.
so much evidence within the Bible, outside of the Bible, that Jesus was an actual person
Yes.
that it's crazy that there are those arguments still there. And I think you're
Yes.
right. Like there has to be like a refresher course. Like, hey, if you're an atheist,
Yeah.
let me tell you guys how this conversation has evolved.
Yeah. Let me help you argue against
Right,
me
right.
because this isn't good right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really feel like it's kind of in a weird place right now.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing. I think
Yes.
it's good because like Wesley Huff's like kind of explosion into fame, and,
Yeah.
like kind of being on the Joe Rogan podcast and Flagrant, doing all these sort of things. I think it really is bringing the Christianity conversation into the mainstream,
Yes.
which is great.
Which is yes,
Yeah,
absolutely solid.
yeah, yeah.
And
Okay.
I think with the like Gen Z and the disembodied existence that everyone is living, to show Christianity for what it is, like this in the our incarnational Christ, right? I think that has a lot of leg. Should we kind of press into that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what's helpful is to have the approach of knowing enough about the Bible where we can defend our faith.
Yeah.
Because as people who aren't atheists, or as people who are atheists consume this type of media, they're gonna want to have conversations about it if it intrigues them, right?
Yes.
Like, oh, this is kind of interesting. Who do I know that I could talk to about this? They're gonna turn to their church-going friends.
Yes.
And I think this is a situation where we should be prepared for that. We don't want to be caught unprepared, where like you suddenly have all your like non-church-going friends finally like approaching you to talk about this stuff.
Yes.
You know, and so yeah, that's kind of what I've been kind of thinking a lot about. I have several friends that are either really early in their faith journey or like flat out reject it. And so like I actually sent this podcast, the Flagrant podcast episode, to one of my friends. Like, hey, like this is super interesting. Like it's kind of vulgar. I mean, it is the Flagrant podcast, so those guys, you know, they're not they curse a lot.
Yeah.
But at least the questions that they're asking, I think, are representative of kind of mainstream atheists' questions.
Yeah.
And I think Wesley Huff does a good job of answering most of it. So yeah, This is-
That's good.
yeah,
I'm glad he's out there.
yeah, yeah. You know, there's a part of me that's a little worried though. Like too much fame for too long. I hope he handles it well.
Yes,
You know?
and explosive growth
Yeah.
is really dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully his fame kind of dwindles down and he
Yes.
can kind of go back to being the dude. But you know what was really surprising about that episode? You know, because Wesley Huff is a really big guy, right?
Yeah.
He's like buff.
Yes.
And Andrew Schultz makes a joke. Oh, this guy it looks like he'll be able to bench like 230. And Wesley Huff's like, And then he's like, what? Like you can't do that? And then he goes, I think you're lowballing it. And then he goes, yeah, the most I've done, like one like rep of, is like 400.
Oh my gosh.
400 bench press is
That's
crazy.
crazy.
To me. Yeah.
And you're a Bible nerd.
Yeah.
Dude.
Historian.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. Well, it's been an hour. Any kind of last thoughts or any?
No. Yeah, just to our those who are in Korean immigrant church setting, keep on pressing on. Keep on pressing on. We don't know what tomorrow brings. We don't know what it's supposed to look like, but you can be faithful to today. You know, just keep on pressing on. It does matter. Yeah, at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say some practical things, just because I've lived through it. The things that were helpful is taking membership seriously.
Yeah.
Because like I said, our church, like people in the EM weren't even offered like membership classes or hey, do you want to become a member? It was always just hey, you guys are over there, we're over here.
Yes.
And us having our own membership and kind of our own church role and all that is great. It was great for this situation for us.
Yes.
Like we knew like there were people committed to our church who like we were able to call on them to be united because you're a member of this church. You made that decision and
Yes.
like as soon as so um uh like as soon as we offered up like hey these are some of the ways you can help like there were people like approaching like hey like what do you need like we'll get on it like so it's and obviously you can have that without like formal membership but all I will say is having the formal membership is has been hugely helpful in creating that community of committed people that like you can press forward together with.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Commit to your local church. And yeah, I think whether membership, getting in the word, the basics, right? The basics of what church is, we need to hone that down. And the more we're committed to doing those things that the Bible commands the church to do, the better off we'll be. And so, yeah, just for our second gen counterparts, like just keep on keeping on, get your head in the game.
Yeah, for sure. Read the Bible, pray. Yeah. Commit to the local church. I feel like that's the
Yeah.
theme. Like that's somehow we always kind of get to that.
Yes,
in every
commit
conversation.
to your local church. We should have a local church episode. We just talk about what the local church is.
That'll be our next
Right?
episode.
Yeah. Like let's
you
just
go.
get into the weeds so people have an understanding of what the local church is supposed to be and why you should commit to it instead of, just youth group light or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you guys for listening. Everybody, let's keep on keeping on.
Yeah.
And, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.